Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created Phaser 3. Previously, we worked on enhancing our game to allow our players to enter buildings, and we added in support for multiple areas for our game. If you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as complete source code for this video. There'll also be a link to the previous videos to catch up, so let's get started. So now that we have support for multiple areas in our game, and our player can enter into buildings, and we can transition to that smoothly, we're going to go ahead and start working on a new feature, and what we're going to do is we're going to work on refactoring some of our logic tied to our NPCs. And then that way we can extend the functionality that we can actually do while we're interacting with our NPCs. And so currently for our NPC, most of our metadata lives inside tiled. And so this results in us having to add our messages to our tiled JSON file, export them out, and then we need to import those into Phaser anytime we want to make a change. We also add in our data for like which frame is tied to this NPC and the movement pattern. And so this is not a problem if our game is smaller in scope, but as our game gets bigger, we'll want to be able to easily edit some of this data without having to do it inside tiled. And so what we're going to do is we're going to decouple some of this data. And what we're going to do is we're going to refactor our NPC data to only require our ID and our movement pattern. And so for the time being, we're leaving movement pattern inside tiled, primarily because this is where we define that if our NPC can move around. And so by decoupling this is going to allow us to have this data live in a separate JSON file that we can easily modify, kind of like our items or monsters JSON file, and we can just tweak it, and then the changes can be applied to our game immediately. But in addition to that, we're going to go ahead and extend that, so then that way your NPCs can actually do different things. So currently, our player can only talk to an NPC, but typically in these types of games, sometimes NPCs might trigger various events in the game, such as maybe like a cutscene. So like when our player enters a certain area, we might want to move our NPC around, have it say something specific to the player, have it leave the scene. We might want to do things to our player, like maybe heal our monsters. So like if we stay at an inn or go to a monster center, we could have that NPC heal our team. And then other things as well. So like we could battle some NPCs. So some NPCs might need that functionality versus some might want to trade monsters with us or even give us items if they're supposed to in the game. And so currently with our existing logic, we would have to do all of that inside tiled here. And we want to go ahead and extract a lot of that away. And so just to see an example of like what we're going to be building is I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the game. And I'm going to go ahead and go to continue. And so for one of our buildings here, we have this new NPC. And when we talk to this NPC, what's going to happen is say, hey, we're going to give you a quick rest. And what's going to do is that's going to trigger some logic in our game to have it go ahead and do this fade in, fade out effect. And that's going to display another message to the player. And what would happen is if our monsters were not fully healed, we'd be able to have that NPC heal them. And so this kind of like takes the place of our inn or our monster center. And so this is kind of like our mom, if you play the original Pokemon games, where she'd always heal you in your starting town. And so what we're going to do is we're going to work on refactoring NPC data so that we can support things like this all through our JSON file. And so we'll build out this dynamic system where we just need to modify our data and our code will be able to handle it. All right, so start making changes for this. What we're going to do is we're going to start off in our building 1 file. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a new NPC here that we'll be using to heal our team. And so to do this, let's go ahead and add a new layer. And we're going to go ahead and add a group layer. And we're just going to call this NPCs. We want that to be NPC, not NPCs. And we'll go ahead and add a new object layer. And we're going to call this NPC1. Let's drag that layer into our group layer. And then what we'll do for our tile, let's go ahead and add in our encounter tile. And we'll go ahead and place that right here on our rug. So for this object tile, what we'll do is let's go ahead and use our NPC class. And so for our NPC class, this is going to look a little bit different than our previous NPCs. And so when we re-imported in our new tiled classes, our NPC class got updated to only have this ID and this movement pattern fields. And so on our other NPCs, we have these fields for messages and we have this field for frame. And what we're going to do is we're going to remove those and we're going to move this over to our JSON file to have that metadata. And so we'll do that in a bit, but I just want to call that out. That's why when we add in this new class here for our NPC, we only have these 2 properties. And so that's going to be expected. And so what we'll want to do for this NPC, we want to give it a unique ID. So for each NPC in our game, we'll want to go ahead and give it a unique ID. And so we're going to give this one 1. And we won't have this NPC move around, so we're going to leave it on idle for our movement pattern. So then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and save. And we're going to go ahead and export this as our building 1 JSON. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and switch over to our code real quick, and we're going to start defining our structure for what we want our NPC data to look like. And then that way we can migrate our data from our other NPCs over to that JSON file. So let's go ahead and switch over to our code. And what we'll want to go ahead and do is under our data folder, let's go ahead and add a new file. And we're just going to call this NPCs JSON. And so what this is going to look like, this is going to be an object, and for each of our objects, we'll have an NPC. And so for our IDs, our key in our object, this is going to match our NPC ID that we defined. And so we're going to go ahead and have one. And then what we'll want to do is for our NPCs, we're going to need to know which frame is associated with them. So we're going to go ahead and add that key. And we're going to go ahead and do 30. And then we need to define a new structure for what we want our NPCs to be able to do. And so for that, we're going to make a new key. We're just going to call this events. I'm going to go ahead and make this an array. All right, and so then inside this event array, this is where we're going to add in all of that custom logic for various events that we'll be able to do with our NPCs in our game. And so this is how we're going to make our game more dynamic. And so inside this array, this is where we'll do things like we'll have our messages for what our NPC is going to say to our player. This is where we'll have different types, like we can have our NPC heal our player. We could have our NPC trade or battle. And this is how we can do all of that just through this array here. And we're going to add support for multiple events, so then that way we can chain them together to do different things. And then later on, we could do things like have our NPC move around our map based on our event data here. And so all we're going to do for the time being is I'm just going to go ahead and define a simple object. This is going to be for a message, so then that way our NPC can say something to us at least. And so for our event object, we want to go ahead and add a property called type. And now this type is going to be our key to know what we need to do when we encounter this object. And we'll know how to process it. And so I'm just going to call this message. And then what we'll do is we'll add another type. We're going to call this data, and this will be an object. And inside this object, this is where we're going to put all of the properties that are specific to how we handle this type of event. So as an example, for if we have a message type, we would want to add a field called messages. And this is going to have our array of messages we want to say to our player. And so this is going to take a place of our data that we originally defined and tiled. And so we'll do you should take a quick rest. And then, so what else we could do with this is, so let's say if we had a type where we want to have a fade in and fade out effect. This is where we could add in the data for our duration and how long we want to wait for that effect to happen. If we're trading, this is where we could say, hey, we're looking for, an iguana knight, and I will trade you a Carno desk for it. This is where we could do things like, if we want to battle, we could add in the NPC's team of monsters that they have for where they're at. If they're going to give you an item, we could add in like the item ID that they'll give to the player, and we could give it a unique ID to know so we've already received that item from the NPC, and so much more. And so by moving this over to this event structure, we can do all kinds of different things in our game. And so we're going to come back more to that in our next video, where we start adding in our actual code structure to handle this. But what I want to do here is at least migrate some of our data so we can start getting an understanding of how we're going to have our NPCs actually talk to our player. All right, so now that we have our first NPC, what we want to go ahead and do is we need to add our other two NPCs from our game. So currently in our main level, we have our NPC that walks around, and then we have our guy over here that's idle. And so what we're going to want to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and copy this block of code. We're going to paste it twice. And so we'll give our IDs unique IDs. So we'll have 2, and we're going to have 3. So then what we'll want to do is back in our tile data, we're going to want to go ahead and update our NPCs to have IDs. And so what we'll do is in our level, we'll go ahead and grab our NPC1. Let's go ahead and grab that object. And we're going to go ahead and update our ID to be 2. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy our messages real quick, and also take a note of our frame. So our frame is 20. So we come back to our JSON file. Let's go ahead and update our frame to be 20. And I'm going to go ahead and just paste our messages right here. Okay, so we just have one message. So what we'll do is we're just going to replace that string here. And then likewise, let's grab our other NPC, and let's go ahead and give him a unique ID of 3. So he's on frame 0, and let's copy his messages. And so let's go ahead and update his frame to be 0. And we'll go ahead and update our message. And so you can save your game from the menu. So we have multiple messages. So what we'll want to do is no longer have to parse that. Instead, since we have our array, we're just going to turn this into an array of strings. Much better. All right, so let's go ahead and save. So now we have our new structure. And like I said, so in our next video, this is when we'll go ahead and process this data and update our game to use it. We're just working on getting our data migrated over. So now back in tiled, what we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and remove our frame and messages properties from our data. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to remove our messages, and I'm going to go ahead and remove our frame. And I'll also do the same thing for our NPC1. And so we'll go ahead and get rid of our frame. And let's go ahead and get rid of our messages. All right. So now let's go ahead and save our data. And we'll want to go ahead and re-export out our JSON file so we have our updated level data. So we're going to do export as, and we'll want to do main_1, and we're going to do JSON. All right, so just a quick recap of what we did here is first in our building 1 level, we added in a new NPC, and we went ahead and used our new NPC data structure where we just have our ID and our movement pattern. Then over in our existing level, we went ahead and updated our existing NPCs to go ahead and only have those 2 fields as well. And we gave every NPC a unique ID. And then what we did is in our code, we created a new JSON file where we have an ID associated with that NPC, and we moved some of that data over, and we introduced a new structure for these events. And later on, this is going to allow us to add new functionality to our in-game with our NPCs just by adding in new event types and adding in code to process them. And so long term, this is making our game more dynamic and easier to enhance. So one thing to know is if you are using your own custom level with your own NPCs, or if you use the same level and added new NPCs to it, you'll also want to make the same changes to your level now. All right, with that brings this video to an end. In our next video, we're going to go ahead and switch back over to our code, and we're going to work on updating our code to handle our new NPC data structure. And so we'll add in logic for loading our NPC JSON file, and we'll go ahead and start updating our code to actually use that for our dialog messages. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to the complete source code for this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in the series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see the links on your screen now.